This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Emerging market shares were propped up today by a rise in Asian markets as, of course, they returned from the Lunar New Year holiday. China's stocks rose the highest as new US-China trade talks kicked off. Now, on the continent, a positive start to the week. South Africa's JSE seeing a strong performance by market heavyweight Naspers. It lifted all-share index today, offsetting losses in most other indices. Now, Naspers was tracking gains in Hong Kong-listed associate Tencent, which, of course, had risen to a 4-month high today. Also coming up on the show, rising concerns that power utility Eskom's financial struggles are far from over. A new round of talks to ease trade tensions between China and the US kicks off in Beijing. And we try out new age technology used to monitor deforestation. Well, let's start off the show in South Africa. The country's struggling state power utility Eskom has resorted to the most intense power supply cuts in about 4 years. Now, according to credit ratings agency Moody's, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa's plan to split the company into 3 entities will do little to address the producer's financial difficulties. Now, the agency's comments follow Eskom's implementation of a so-called Stage 4 rotational power cut across the country. Moody's is one of the only 3 major ratings firms that has South African debt at investment grade. The power cuts are expected to cost South Africa as much as $364 million a day. Well, let's cross over to South Africa and get more on these power cuts. We're joined by Sumitra Naidu in Johannesburg. Very welcome to the show, Sumitra. And let's start off with the expected impact that of course, Eskom's move to start Stage 4 power cuts in the country. What impact will they have on businesses going forward? Now, this will see about 4,000 megawatts of demand out of the system. Industrial customers will be the biggest victims. So, Sumitra, what will be the cost of this decision?
Well, Uche, I think we're in a phase of expecting the unexpected. So the power cut started yesterday with no warning from Eskom. Most of Johannesburg is in darkness this evening as we speak. As I was driving in, all the local corner shops, the supermarkets, restaurants, pubs, bars, all closed. It poses a safety and security risk. Fortunately, this building has a generator. And just a short while ago as well, the president said that he was shocked and he was worried about the fact that Eskom is warning of a lot more load shedding in the weeks to come, and probably months. We're hearing some analysts saying that it's going to take 5 years before the situation can come right. It is also surprising because it is summer and demand is low. So the full impact of the power cuts will only be quantified in time, but there's no doubt it will cost the economy dearly. Industrial users, as you say, mining, manufacturing, agriculture will all be hard hit, as these are some of the major contributors to GDP. Now, corporate South Africa too will be spending millions on generating alternative power supply. Generators that are expensive, that run on fuel, will be an added cost for these companies. Banks and retailers, the entire country will be struggling with this. While big business and industry have already warned of lower output and job losses, it's the small businesses that may suffer worse. Many that can't afford alternatives or energy alternatives will have to close shop. The timing couldn't be worse. We are already on thin ice with the credit rating agencies. The economy is weak and we have an unemployment crisis. Uche?
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, Sumitra. Of course, President Ramaphosa's plan to split Eskom into 3 different entities, as well as provide extra financial support, it's been met with some skepticism from these ratings agencies. Actually, Moody's says the plan will do little to address the company's financial difficulties, and it actually could impact the government's fiscal strength going forward. How has this message from Moody's been received in the country?
Well, on the face of it, on paper, this plan looks really good. It's been welcomed across the board. The problem is that it's going to take time. Now, because Eskom is in such a poor state, it is bleeding cash. It's spending millions on diesel a month at some power stations to keep the lights on. Because it's running out of coal supply in some other stations. Some of the stations are in desperate need of maintenance as well. This too is costing the utility. So while it has a plan to split the company, it will take time. It can't be done overnight, and it will also come at a cost. And this has become quite worrying. Eskom's debt is around $30 billion. Its revenue right now can't actually service that debt. The fact that government says it will assist financially means more strain on the fiscus. Moody's and the other rating agencies have warned against this for years, and it's not the only state-owned entity that keeps on getting government bailouts and loans and guarantees. This reduces South Africa's ability to go to the market for investment. And with unstable power supply and a constrained fiscus, the agencies, like everyone else, is wondering how exactly will this economy grow. Uche?
Now, of course, in light of all this news around the power cuts and the new plan to split the utility firm, Public Enterprise Minister Pravin Gordhan, he's actually meeting with Eskom's board today to map a way forward. What do you expect to come out of that meeting?
Yes, as you say, the meeting was today. We also understand that the finance minister is also in talks with Eskom. More details should come through in the coming days, but it does look like there may have to be some serious restructuring at the parastatal and some pain in terms of job losses. There's been several reports on how over-bloated Eskom is. Too many employees that are not critical staff, but nothing confirmed at this stage. Of course, we'll have to wait for more details on what the plan is going forward.
Now, in line with these job cuts, we know workers' unions, such as the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, they've rejected this idea of unbundling Eskom going forward. They say it might lead to further job cuts for workers. So this could lead to strike action moving forward. How do you expect to see the government handling this?
Well, apparently there's been consultation around this. As you say, the union's not happy about possible retrenchments. They are planning strike action. They may go further in terms of work stoppages, which Eskom and the country as a whole can't afford. There may be further consultation and intervention from government to get the unions aboard to assist at this time. But I think government actually has its hand full in trying to keep the lights on and trying to make this plan work in order to, in terms of splitting it into 3 entities. So I think they're busy trying to get that going. There probably will be more consultation with the unions, but the union's not happy at this stage.
Well, we'll certainly be watching. Many thanks, Sumitra, for that update. Sumitra Naidu joining us there in Johannesburg. Now, elsewhere in the country,
the employers are not allowing us to continue.
Miners are unclear about the identity of those currently trapped underground, although the South African police say that 3 of the deceased are Lesotho nationals and the 4th is a South African.
I'm not sure at the present moment, is it thieves or is it people who are hungry, or is it mine workers? They are hungry because they never get paid for the...
Start sucking the poisonous air out of the mine. Fresh air replaces the poisonous air, and then we can send the rescue teams underground to go and recover the personnel that are underground.
The situation remains tense, with family members of those trapped underground on one side of the mine and miners on the other side. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Mpumalanga, South Africa.
And now a look at our corporate headlines today. Africa's online retailer Jumia is planning an initial public offering in New York this year that could value Now, MTN Group, which is Jumia's largest shareholder, is considering raising as much as $600 million from selling its shares through this IPO. With a capital base of $1 billion, Jumia is one of the most valued e-commerce companies in Africa. Meanwhile, banker Gail Kelly and Australian retailer Patrick Allaway have both resigned as independent and non-executive directors of retailer Woolworths with immediate effect. Their sudden departure comes just a few months after both stood for re-election as Woolworths board members at its annual general meeting in November last year. Now, sudden departures of independent and non-executives are often interpreted as protests against governance issues within corporations, while Woolworths is yet to give a reason for Kelly's and Allaway's resignations. Meanwhile, Radisson Hotel Group is planning to operate up to 130 hotels in Africa by 2022. That's up from about 50 this year, of course, as it seeks to reinforce its foothold on the continent. The group currently has around 28 hotels in operation, as well as under development across 13 African nations. And finally, Apple's Chinese smartphone shipments plunged by about 20% during the fourth quarter of 2018. During the same period, Chinese tech giant Huawei saw a 23.3% increase in sales of its flagship handsets. The overall Chinese market contracted around 9.7% in the quarter, with about 103 million handsets being sold. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Let's take a quick break now, still coming up. Egypt's annual consumer price inflation declines to 12.2% in January, and a teacher strike is suspended in Zimbabwe.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. See, business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN. Welcome back. Let's head to Egypt now, where annual consumer price inflation declined to 12.2% in January 2019. That's compared to 17% in January 2018. Now, back in December, the annual inflation level reached about 11.1% compared to 22.3% in the same month of 2017. Now, according to the Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics, inflation accelerated by 0.8% in January, recording 298.8 points compared to 296.5 points in December 2018. Now, CAPMAS has attributed the hike in inflation on a monthly basis to the increase of some commodity prices, as of course vegetable prices rose by 3.9%, cereals and bread rose by 1.8%. Now, the International Monetary Fund expects inflation to decline to 20.9% in 2018 compared to 23.5% in 2017. It is anticipating it to reach about 14% during this year and 7% in 2023. Inflation, of course, has surged since the flotation of the Egyptian pound in 2016, reaching a high record level in July due to energy subsidy cuts. And staying in the country, Egypt has taken over the one-year presidency of the African Union at the AU summit in Addis Ababa. The newly elected AU chair, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, addressed the summit, saying he will prioritize security on the continent. Now, Yasser Hakim looks at what Egypt hopes to achieve on the economic front as the new head of the AU.
In his latest statements before leaving for Addis Ababa, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi stressed that the African economy is one of his main priorities. Cairo hopes the long-sought dream of a continental free trade area will be adopted during its term. So far, only 18 out of 49 members have ratified the treaty. It needs 22 states to be put into effect.
Unfortunately, the inter-African trade at present is only 14%. The rest is still be done with the former colonial powers and others. We'd like to increase this area to have all Africa included and to encourage partners in order to have an agreement with this continental grouping for investment, finance, technical assistance, transfer of technology, and this will allow more interactive between African peoples, not only the business people.
For many businessmen, the continent lacks vital components to upscale its investments.
Africa needs a lot of energy in the coming years and infrastructure especially, and Egypt has already done major steps in this respect. Since 2014 till now, Egypt has gone a long way in different infrastructure projects and renewable energy. So we can make use of Egypt's experience in this respect to different African countries.
Egypt will also resume outgoing AU chair Namibia's efforts in restructuring the AU setup and membership regulations to raise more sources of income for the organization. However, experts believe the main target should always be the African citizen.
Africa for a long time now is suffering from the poverty problem. Many Africans are still under the poverty line, recognized by the international community. That's why we'd like to devise a plan in order to make the governments concerned encourage involvement of women, youth, and the private sector, and so on, in order to uplift this poverty, which is affecting the social fabric of many countries.
This is the fourth time that Egypt resides over the AU, and most experts believe it's a pivotal period. Africa needs to develop its economies that have lagged far behind other continents. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, this year, the African Union's agenda looks to significantly institute wide-ranging economic and social policies. The AU Commissioner for Economic Affairs, Professor Victor Harrison, says that economic policies are needed to stimulate the continent.
Promote a green economy. Social development is important. We have to strengthen education and improve the quality of education as well as protection. Lastly, we also have to develop institutions. We need to stimulate inter-African. We have to stimulate Africa's partnership with the rest of the world, and also we have to strengthen regional integration.
Meanwhile, in Zimbabwe, teachers are back at work after calling off a strike which began nearly a week ago. Unions representing teachers issued a statement urging their members to return to work as they are set to continue negotiations with the government.
Teachers suspended the strike following crisis meetings with government officials over the weekend, which renewed confidence that some of their sector-specific demands will be met. Educators had embarked on the job action to press for higher pay, but unions representing them say they are now in discussions for other non-monetary incentives.
We seem to have secured agreement from the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education, the Public Service Commission, as well as Treasury, who were represented and present in the past 2 days as we engaged. And there's a commitment to say, let us try this, have a trial run and have a dialogue at education sector level. So we are going to try this through the crisis talks that we are going to be having, hopefully beginning this week, so that we can see what allowances can quickly be paid.
They have not ruled out a resumption of the strike action should this latest round of talks fail. Zimbabwe civil servants have been asking for higher pay in the face of rising inflation, which recently hit a 10-year high. Zimbabwe's government has introduced spending cuts and plans to trim the civil service as part of austerity measures meant to trigger economic recovery. Farah Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Well, let's move to Tunisia now. The visit of the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Turkmenistan to Tunisia has been described as historic. Now, the official affirmed his country's willingness to intensify bilateral consultations in order to boost cooperation with the country, saying that it is essential to conclude as soon as possible more agreements on trade, economy, scientific research, tourism, as well as education. Here's Adnan Shaushi with more.
Turkmenistan's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Razid Meredo has visited Tunisia at the invitation of Foreign Minister Khamis Jhinawi. It is the first visit of a foreign minister from Turkmenistan to Tunisia since the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries in November 1992.
First of all, I would like to say that it was a very great honor for me to mention about the very high-level political cooperation between Turkmenistan and Republic of Tunisia, particularly in the framework of the United Nations. During many, many years, the Republic of Tunisia supported Turkmenistan and its initiatives, and particularly Republic of Tunisia was one of the first countries in the world recognized the independence of Turkmenistan.
Two memoranda of understanding were signed between Tunisia and Turkmenistan in the political and diplomatic fields.
We signed two important documents and we agreed to continue this work, and I very strongly believe that in the nearest future we will prepare some very important agreements, memorandums regarding the expansion of our cooperation in different fields, not only in the political and diplomatic spheres, in trade, economic, and science, tourism, education, and others.
For his part, Jhinawi indicated that the visit of the head of diplomacy of Turkmenistan to Tunisia is historic.
This visit has helped establish relations between the two sisterly countries and identify cooperation opportunities in trade, investment, energy, and tourism fields. Turkmenistan has tremendous potential, particularly in the cultural and economic fields. We also agreed to avoid double taxation and to protect and develop investments between the two countries.
Rashid Meredov was received at Carthage Palace. He hailed Tunisia's key role in establishing security and stability in the region.
Tunisian President Beji Qaid Essebsi highlighted during the meeting with Meredov the importance of capitalizing on the factors of historical and civilizational rapprochement to establish economic relations between Tunis and Ashgabat. Adnan Shabashi, CGTN, Tunis.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now. Still coming up. A new round of talks to ease trade tensions between China and the U.S. kicks off in Beijing. And Palestinians try to create jobs after the United States stops supplying aid.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Just about 5:30, let's recap today's headlines. Now, the African Union Heads of State Summit has concluded in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. Leaders have called for an end to forced displacements as well as durable solutions to the refugee situation on the continent. The leaders also agreed to scale up efforts of combating the threat of terrorism in the Sahel and Lake Chad regions and the continent at large. And a tragic situation at the Gloria coal mine in South Africa's Mpumalanga province remains unchanged. That's where an explosion killed about 6 people last week. It's believed there are still about 22 people trapped underground. And Algeria's incumbent president, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, has been picked by the ruling FLN party as the presidential flag bearer in the upcoming elections. However, he will need a formal announcement from his party before the 3rd of March to be confirmed as a presidential candidate. Of course, Bouteflika has been in power in Algeria since 1999. And that's a recap of today's headlines. Now, on the international front, Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are looking for new ways to create jobs and stimulate the local economy. And that's after U.S. aid ceased all its assistance in the Palestinian territories. Now, CGTN's Noor Harizan tells us more from Gaza.
On January 31st, the United States Agency for International Development ended all assistance to Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, a decision that deeply affected hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. However, Palestinians in Gaza are trying to compensate for the shortfall in the U.S. funding throughout multiple emerging projects. UCAS is one of the most famous technology incubators in Gaza, providing basic financial support for young Palestinians with creative ideas.
We welcome creators, entrepreneurs, and those who have creative ideas to join our business incubator.
We provide them with a good working environment and the required logistics, in addition to the basic funding according to the nature and needs of the project. One person's idea can turn into a successful project that employs dozens of Palestinians.
Young agriculture engineer Hisham Shreim from the Gaza Strip is one of those who joined the UCAS Business Technology Incubator. The 25-year-old designed an agro-technology application called Agariotech. The application is an agricultural system that links agricultural greenhouses to an electronic system that allows the farmer to follow the crop's growth through a phone application. Agariotech also predicts plant diseases and rationalizes the consumption of water and pesticides in more than 15,000 greenhouses in Gaza.
I thought up this project to develop the agricultural sector in Palestine and reduce the indiscriminate use of pesticides, water, and fertilizers. My ultimate dream is to develop the farms in Palestine, increase the profitability of farmers, and strengthen the Palestinian agricultural sector in general.
This project can help thousands of farmers in Gaza. They have been living in difficult conditions due to an 11-year Israeli blockade of the coastal enclave and the cutting off of funding for projects in Palestine that has led to a decline in agricultural production over the past months. Nur Harazin, CGTN, Gaza.
Well, let's move on now to trade tensions between the U.S. and China. The U.S. trade delegation has concluded the first day of working-level trade discussions between the two countries. Now, escalating tensions between the two nations have cost both about billions of dollars and disrupted global trade and business flows. The two sides are trying to hammer out a deal ahead of the March 1st deadline. That's when U.S. tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports are scheduled to increase to 25% from 10%. Well, let's get some more insight into those talks today. We're joined now by Jim Spellman. He's joining us in Washington. Welcome to the show, Jim. Now, of course, according to Trump, negotiators have made tremendous progress on a number of those tough issues, but U.S. officials saying the two sides still remain pretty far apart on some of those key issues. So, Jim, what is the latest on those ongoing talks in Beijing?
Well, as you mentioned, a mid-level U.S. delegation in Beijing right now. Later this week, the top U.S. negotiators will meet with Vice Premier Liu He in Beijing. That delegation will be led by the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, seen as a trade hardliner, and U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, seen as more of a free trade advocate. This seems to be building up, though, to a potential meeting between President Trump and President Xi. China hasn't committed to a meeting. Trump has said a meeting could happen around his visit to Vietnam, where he will meet with Kim Jong-un the last 2 days in February. That would bump right up against that March 1st deadline. Combining those two meetings in one trip, though, now seems to be off the table for the White House, and the clock is ticking on these trade talks. As you mentioned, President Trump and President Xi set a March 1st deadline to come up with a deal, or Trump may raise tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods from 10% to 25%. So given that and this shrinking timetable, it's not clear if that March 1st deadline may perhaps be extended. Back to you.
Well, let's talk about the issues on the table, Jim. The U.S. has been pushing against what it calls unfair trade practices. Of course, China denies it engages in such practices. So what are the main sticking points for the two nations that could jeopardize a deal before, of course, that March 1st deadline?
Right. So there seems to be some consensus that the trade deficit, something President Trump talks about a lot, could be reduced by China purchasing more U.S. goods like soybeans and perhaps liquefied natural gas. That leaves the more difficult issues like intellectual property protection and greater access to the Chinese market for U.S. firms. Some of these issues are addressed in draft legislation being fast-tracked in China. It's not clear if those new laws would go far enough for the U.S. side. And a key issue for Washington is enforcement. We don't know at this point whether a framework has been agreed to that would create an enforcement mechanism that satisfies the U.S. side but isn't too obtrusive for the Chinese side. We also don't know what China gets out of this deal and what the U.S. side is offering regarding the existing tariffs. Will they be lifted if a deal is reached? Still, we just do not have clarity on these thornier issues throughout this negotiation.
Now, the IMF on Sunday warned of a possible economic storm as global growth forecasts continue to fall. It cited the trade row as one of the four clouds over the global economy. So what are the chances that we could see this talks failing and the biggest threats to the success of those negotiations?
Well, look, there's no doubt behind all the politicking that both sides know that it's vital to their own economies for these talks to succeed. I think perhaps the biggest threat, though, to the negotiations comes from the larger U.S. political picture. President Trump's facing a number of challenges at home. The U.S. government could partly shut down again in a few days over Trump's demands for a border wall. President Trump faces increasing pressure in the ongoing special counsel probe into the 2016 election. And Democrats now control the U.S. House of Representatives, making it more difficult for Trump to accomplish much heading into this next election cycle. So this White House is often unpredictable. Any of these issues could change the dynamic of the trade talks in any way. They could scuttle the talks or potentially create more incentive for President Trump to make a deal, to have something to brag about going into the next election cycle. Back to you.
Many thanks, Jim, for that update. Of course, Jim Spellman joining us there in Washington. Let's move on now. From ordering food at the touch of a button to the latest e-commerce ventures, convenience certainly appears to be a commodity consumers are increasingly willing to pay for. Now, a UAE business is road testing that theory with a fuel delivery service, and CGTN's Jacob Greaves reports from Dubai.
Could this be about to fuel the latest delivery craze? Petrol taken from the pump to your car without the punter having to queue at a petrol station. Dubai is the staging ground for company Cafu, hoping to roll the idea out across the UAE.
We relate our prices to the pump price, the fuel station price, and we charge a convenience charge, which is the charge for getting the fuel delivered. Obviously, it's people do, there are certain segments in the market who would pay for convenience, and we have seen it in things like food delivery and e-commerce. I mean, you see that whole industry is shaping up.
They've only been operating a matter of months, but they've honed the product around that convenience. You don't even need to be present during the delivery.
In principle, once you've downloaded the app, ordering a refuelling truck like this takes just 3 steps. Set a time, leave the petrol tank unlocked, then propose a location.
This might be an Emirates synonymous with luxury, but it still begs the question, are they trying to solve a problem that doesn't really exist? Not according to one customer.
What I realized in Dubai is that every time I have to go to a petrol station, I have to wait like 10 to 15 minutes in line, and I have to drive like 10 miles. Now I live in JLT, and the closest one is 10 miles away. So for me, this is time consuming, and I'd rather sit in my office and just order it, and the car would be refueled automatically.
In the driving seat for now, Cafu faces future competition from UAE oil giant ADNOC. Though still to launch, they're testing a service dubbed Call to Fuel. But this is an oil-producing nation, reflected in low prices at the pump. In countries where petrol seriously pinches the pockets, this business model might face an uphill start. Jacob Greaves, CGTN in Dubai.
Meanwhile, one of the world's largest automotive interior suppliers, Shanghai-based Yangfeng, envisions giving passengers the ability to customize their vehicles to meet their needs. Well, it's about enjoying the scenery in front of work or workspace in the Mac. Well, here's CGTN's Mark New with more on Yangfeng's vision from Silicon Valley.
At a special event in Silicon Valley, curious crowds line up to catch a glimpse of what could be the future. Shanghai-based Yangfeng, one of the world's largest automotive interior suppliers, unveils for the first time ever its vision of what the inside of autonomous cars will look like someday.
Even before it arrives, you can see that it's cleaning itself. So there's a UV light that's sweeping the front table, so that's sanitizing all the high-touch areas.
Vice President of Research and Design Tim Xu grants us access.
The simple palm scan, the vehicle welcomes us, so we'll have our name show up or welcome whoever the designated rider is. Lights come on and the seats rotate to welcome us.
The phone charger syncs, and a cup holder does the same. In front of me are the main controls embedded in the bamboo.
So this is a touch screen here?
It is. Okay. So you go this back to the menu, and you can do, for example, here temperature control as well.
The controls also feature a technology from the company Noveto called virtual headphones, where music is played only for me.
This is being sent only to you.
Wow, I can hear music in my ear,
Yes.
and he can't hear me.
That's
pretty amazing.
That's hard to capture on video, but our camera can pick up a trace of what I'm hearing when we put our microphone next to my ear.
Oh, I see you're also not wearing any headphones.
Ride sharing of the future would not be complete without a comfortable back seat that can also entertain.
You can just be close to the surface and it will react. Because in fact, the sensitivity is not in the surface itself. It's actually the camera that's reading the space.
The fabric with sensors inside is a technology developed by Yanfeng called Active Skin. I can actually touch it and change the mood that I'm feeling at the moment, or feeling more playful, I can even play some games.
I could absolutely see scenarios where this is in my garage and I'm going up the coast. And today, as an experience, I don't want to drive. I just want to look.
Yanfeng says 70% of the innovations in their concept experience are ready to go into production now.
The emotional connection to a car has always been very strong. And it's very much driven by the exterior design and the act of driving. Now, the act of driving is going to disappear over time, and the exterior design is going to be less important. So what we're focusing on in our future vision as well is an opportunity to create that emotional connection to the interior.
Hendricks says when passengers ride on a plane or a train, they're less concerned about how it looks on the outside compared to the ambiance inside. Yanfeng believes that idea will shift to the auto world too, as more people focus on enjoying the ride since they're no longer needed at the wheel. Work News, CGTN, Sunnyvale, California.
Now, with an aging workforce and a rise in chronic diseases, Singapore has been grappling with a severe manpower crunch. This, of course, has led to a push towards automation in the country. While CGTN's Mirulu takes a look at some of the latest robots being created in the city-state in order to help businesses manage their human resources.
So sorry, but you're in my way. Could you please move?
Don't be surprised if you see this robot cleaning your office buildings, shopping malls and airports in Singapore. By April this year, the first 100 LeoBot scrub will be deployed to commercial cleaning companies. The bot can scrub any type of floor and is always cheerful and pleasant.
Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock. The clock struck 3 and he needed 3. Hickory dickory dock.
As tall as an average 6-year-old, it's designed to be efficient, compact and nimble. It can easily go through small doors and get into confined spaces. But instead of selling it at exorbitant prices, its creators at LionSpot plan to rent it out as part of their robot-as-a-service model. Dr. Mohan Rajesh Ilara is a professor at the Singapore University of Technology and Design and one of the brains behind LeoBot.
While it is on a rental service, it makes it more affordable for these contractors to purchase them in large numbers, and also they can relinquish on maintenance issue because maintenance could be handled by, in this case, by LionSpot. We can provide the maintenance support, so it's light on the customer's end.
This is Strobo. He was instantly famous because of his role as the RoboCop from the ASEAN Summit held in Singapore last November. Don't be fooled by its adorable shape and size. It is equipped with facial recognition, a built-in GPS, along with 6 cameras to allow a complete 360-degree view of its surroundings.
It's able to actually listen for distress call, for example, and the robot knows exactly where is the call coming from. Okay, and last but not least, as an example, right, the robot itself is after all, it's a robot, it's a machine. It's not emotional, basically. So as a result, right, it's more reliable.
Currently being tested at Gardens by the Bay, its biggest advantage is that it can patrol long distances without getting tired, like its human colleagues, and can cover secluded areas and CCTV blind spots.
Excuse me, ma'am, do you need any assistance?
While this robot is performing time-consuming and laborious work, human officers are free to focus their time on more crucial and specialized tasks, Singapore has been encouraging automation in businesses. The city-state committed $450 million to the National Robotics Program in 2016. National Trades Union Congress looks after workers' interests in Singapore. Assistant Secretary General Zainal Supari told CGTN that they're not worried about machines taking over human jobs. Instead, the trade union encourages workers to upskill and improve their employability.
Really equipping our workers with the necessary skills for them to be ready, more resilient, as well as relevant. This could include equipping them with the necessary IT skills, with the necessary adaptive skills.
Unlike the rest of the world, robots in Singapore are not seen as a threat, but a necessity. They're being deployed in a wide range of areas from hospitals to hotels. And with technology getting cheaper and more accessible, it would be safe to assume that robots will certainly be a huge part of Singapore's future. Mirulu, CGTN, Singapore.
And Russia is the latest country to renew plans to travel to the moon. The state's government has promised to invest more millions of dollars in the nation's space agency. NASA is also planning to launch a human moon mission soon, with astronauts likely to stay on the lunar surface. Here's CGTN's Dan Ashby with more.
Bubbling away in a Russian laboratory, an experiment that could bring a breath of fresh air to space travel. The production of algae produces oxygen, so this company is developing an energy-efficient way to make it in space, allowing astronauts to breathe for longer.
If it will be successful, this device will allow the people to infinitely live in space. In space on the moon, on a big space station far from the Earth or on Mars. If you want to fly far from the Earth, we have to make something like this small biosphere.
And if the experiment works, there may be a lot of demand.
Whatever happens to this algae, this laboratory is symbolic of a bigger trend. Experiments like this are popping up all over the world because the race into space is back.
China's spacecraft recently landed on the far side of the moon, a historic first.
Buzz Aldrin.
But there's a military edge to the race too. President Trump wants to create a US Space Force to protect US satellites. And Russia's state-run Sputnik outlet claims this is a prototype of a Russian space drone. One top expert is urging the superpowers to work together.
Everyone is looking at the moon. Everyone will try, if not to repeat the Apollo program, but do something even more difficult, build a base there. I hope that it'll be an analogue of the International Space Station. Such an optimistic development depends strongly on politics, on political mutual relationships, and if everyone together masters cooperation in space, then it will happen.
And this is one cause for hope. The first plant ever to be grown in a canister on the moon. It survived only a short while, but it shows that a biosphere on the moon may be possible. So, who knows? Maybe even these small and slimy pieces of Earth might yet help us unlock great swathes of the universe. Dan Ashby, CGTN, Moscow.
And shifting focus now, here's a look at how commodities performed today. Oil prices steady as support from OPEC-led supply restraints was countered by an uptick in U.S. drilling. Now, also concerns about demand due to the slow progress in U.S.-Chinese trade talks continues to hold back prices. Meanwhile, gold prices falling as well today as investors look to the safety of the dollar to stave off risks from the U.S.-China trade spat. Also, as concerns continue to mount over a slowdown in global growth. Well, we're heading into a short break now. Here's a look at what's coming up. We try out new age technology used to monitor deforestation. And Egypt wins a bid to host the African Space Agency headquarters.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Now, the effects of climate change are becoming more evident across the world. Just recently, a study revealed that some coffee, one of the world's most consumed beverages, could soon be extinct as a result of extreme weather changes across the globe. Now, pressure is mounting on international companies to source agricultural ingredients that are grown in a responsible, environmentally friendly way. Here's CGTN's Wangari bringing us one such example.
Some of the world's biggest palm oil users are trying out new satellite technology to monitor deforestation. They say the monitoring systems allow them to target people felling trees in producing countries like Malaysia and Indonesia more efficiently than policing supply chains on the ground.
With Starling, what we're gaining is an ability to monitor the entirety of our supply chain, whether it's certified yet or not, and it gives us real-time information beyond just that snapshot in time. What it is then, it also alerts us if anything is changing moving forward from there.
Nestle was back in the headlines last year when it was briefly suspended by the Round Table on Sustainable Palm Oil for not showing how it would scale up purchases of certified palm oil. From next month, it plans to publish data online from an Airbus-developed satellite system called Starling to put responsibility on the mill that extracts oil from the palm fruit. Unilever says it is on track for all its core volume purchases to be certified by the end of 2019 and is also using satellite technology. It is piloting a free satellite tracking tool called Global Forest Watch Pro, which will launch later this year.
The feedback has been mostly positive, that our suppliers are ready to work with us to act on the information, and it's mostly been discussions and seeking of additional information.
Some say the technology is not enough to stop deforestation, that monitoring is not preventing. Others worry boycotting unsustainably made palm oil just drives bad practices elsewhere.
So our focus in engaging mills is not on segregating out sustainable and not sustainable, but working with companies and working with mills to implement systems to really transform the industry as a whole and transform supply chains as a whole.
Palm oil contributes less to deforestation than beef or soy, which are responsible for much of the destruction in the Brazilian Amazon. But it has garnered attention because it thrives in biodiverse regions, threatening endangered species and exasperating global warming. Palm oil buyers have now ramped up the use of satellite imagery as they rush to meet a pledge of zero to net deforestation by 2020. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Meanwhile, Egypt has won a bid to host the headquarters of the African Space Agency. Nigeria and Ethiopia were amongst the main competitors for the bid to host the agency's headquarters. Now, the African Space Agency was established by the initiative of the African Union back in 2017. The agency is aimed at promoting and coordinating development of space science across the continent for improved technological advancements. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with more.
Egypt has a long history in space science. The space agency was inaugurated in 1970, and Egypt has launched its own satellites such as the NileSat 1 and 2 and EgyptSat 1 and 2. Those are some of the reasons why Cairo has won the bid to host the Africa Space Agency headquarters.
مصر عندها المدينة الفضائية.
Egypt has its space city in Cairo with all the facilities to receive satellites such as ground control stations, a data receiving station in Aswan, space payload lab and engineering design lab. Egypt also has the only lab in the Middle East and Africa to produce satellite components locally in partnerships with China. What's more important is that Egypt has 50 highly qualified and well-experienced space scientists.
Egypt will provide the infrastructure and financial contribution to the institution, while the rest of the funding will come from the African Union member states and other donor countries. Experts say the African Space Agency will be a valuable addition to the continent.
Only 7 African countries have space science: Morocco, Egypt, Algeria, Ghana, Angola, South Africa and Nigeria. The Africa Space Agency will be of great assistance to all Africa. It will locate the huge natural underground resources in the continent such as gold, minerals and others. It will help in agriculture, fighting desertification, dealing with climate change. Countries that don't have space agencies will also be given satellite photos that could assist them in security and border control.
China will also lend a helping hand to the agency. It has pledged an initial $750 million for research and development, in addition to the transfer of technology and expertise. Space and technology are vital components in the development of nations. Experts believe that having an African Space Agency will go a long way in promoting and achieving those developmental goals in the continent. Yes, Hakeem for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, before we go, a quick look at Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand falling to its weakest in almost 3 weeks as, of course, state firm Eskom stepped up controlled power cuts over a shortage of generating capacity. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling also weakening, and it is forecast to ease further, and that's due to dollar demand from manufacturers as well as oil importers exceed inflows from diaspora remittances. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and of course the rest of the team, thanks for watching.